Welcome, everyone. Today we'll be diving into the nervous system, which is one of the most fascinating and complex systems in the human body. Think of it as the ultimate communication network, handling everything from automatic breathing to the conscious decision to raise your hand. By the end of this chapter, you'll see how electrical signals inside the neurons become thoughts, emotions, and movements. The nervous system is designed for speed. It takes the information from multiple sources, integrates it, and responds in less than a second. Not only does it control muscles, contractions, and glandular secretions, it also allows for conscious decision making, emotions, and self awareness. Keep in mind, the nervous system doesn't work alone. It constantly teams up with the endocrine system to maintain homeostasis or balance in our bodies. We divide the nervous system into two main parts: the central nervous system, or CNS, which includes the brain and the spinal cord, which acts as the command center. The peripheral nervous system, or the PNS, includes all of the nerves that branch out and connect to the CNS to the rest of the body. Within the PNS, we have the sensory pathways that carry information to the central nervous system and the motor pathways that carry commands back out. These motor pathways split further into voluntary somatic control and involuntary or autonomic control. At the core of the system are the neurons. These are specialized cells that transmit information. Sensory neurons bring in the data, interneurons process and connect information within the central nervous system, and motor neurons carry instructions back to the muscles and glands. Together they form a circuit that makes everything from reflexes to memory possible. Each neuron has three main parts: the cell body, the dendrites, and the axon. The cell body houses the nucleus and the machineries of the cell. Dendrites act like the little antenna, bringing information in, and the axon is like the long wire carrying electrical impulses away from the cell body. When you put it all together, we get a living electrical circuit that forms the foundation of thoughts and movement. Now that we know the structure of the neuron, let's talk about how they actually send messages. Neurons communicate using electrical impulses called action potentials. Think of an action potential like a brief electrical spark that travels down the axon. This spark is the primary language of the nervous system. It's how neurons talk to each other and how your brain can send messages to your toes in a fraction of a second. For a neuron to be ready to fire, it maintains what we call a resting potential. Inside the cell is more negative than outside at roughly negative 70 millivolts. This balance is kept by a sodium-potassium pump, which constantly pushes sodium out and potassium in. It actively pumps 3 sodiums out of the cell and pushes 2 potassiums in. This pumping counteracts the passive ion movement. Sodium leaks in and potassium leaks out via these leaky channels. Not every stimulus is strong enough to create a full action potential. Sometimes you get a smaller change in the voltage called a graded potential. These can either bring the neuron closer to firing or make it less likely to fire. What's important is that multiple graded potentials can actually add up. This process is called summation. If the total reaches a certain threshold, that's when the action potential begins. Here's how it plays out. When the threshold is reached, sodium channels fly open and sodium rushes into the neuron, flipping the charge inside. That's known as depolarization. When potassium channels open, allowing potassium to exit, restoring the original polarity, the cell briefly dips below the resting potential in hyperpolarization before the sodium-potassium pumps bring it back to negative 70 millivolts. This chain reaction sweeps down the axon like a wave, carrying the signal all the way to the axon terminal. After firing, the neuron enters a refractory period. During the absolute refractory phase, it's impossible to trigger another action potential. This ensures signals only move forward. In the relative refractory period, the neuron can fire again, but only if the stimulus is stronger than usual. This built-in timing mechanism keeps the nerve signals orderly and prevents chaos in communication. Action potentials follow the all or none rule. Either the threshold is reached and the full impulse fires, or nothing happens. Once it's triggered, the signal always has the same strength and speed of the particular neuron. What changes with stronger stimuli is how often the neuron fires. More frequent action potentials signal greater intensity. This process is self propagating, like a row of dominoes falling one after another. Neurons don't work alone. They're supported by neuroglial cells, which make up about 80% of the nervous system. Unlike neurons, glial cells don't send action potentials, but they provide essential support, nutrients, and protection. In the peripheral nervous system, Schwann cells are the key players, while in the central nervous system, oligodendrocytes and astrocytes take on these roles. Schwann cells form myelin sheath around the axons of the peripheral nervous system. Myelin speeds up signal transmission dramatically, up to 50 times faster through saltatory conduction. That's where the signal jumps from one node of NBA to the next. Myelin also saves energy and even helps axons regenerate when damaged. In the central nervous system, oligodendrocytes form the same job, creating new white matter you see in the brain and spinal cord cross sections. When myelin breaks down, serious disorders can result. In multiple sclerosis, the immune system attacks the myelin in the brain and spinal cord, leading to weakness, vision problems, and even paralysis. In amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, also known as ALS, or also known as Lou Gehrig's disease, the myelin around the motor neuron degenerates, causing muscles to weaken and waste away. These diseases highlight just how vital myelin is for healthy nervous system function. Finally, once the action potential reaches the axon terminal, the signal jumps to the next cell. This happens at the synapse, a tiny gap between neurons or between a neuron and the muscle or gland cell. The presynaptic neuron releases chemical messengers called neurotransmitters, which cross the synaptic cleft and bind to receptors on the postsynaptic cell. This is where electrical information turns into chemical communication, allowing the system to pass the message forward. Not every neurotransmitter has the same effect. Some excite the postsynaptic cell, bringing it closer to firing an action potential. Others inhibit, pushing the cell further from threshold. The response depends on the type of neurotransmitter, how much is released, and the receptors on the target cell. The effect of many neurotransmitters are short-lived. They're either taken back up by the presynaptic cell, destroyed by enzymes, or diffuse away. If they weren't removed quickly, signals would linger and overwhelm the system. Acetylcholine is one of the main neurotransmitters. It's crucial for muscle contraction. Every time you blink or move your hand, acetylcholine is at work. It also helps regulate heart rate and digestion through the parasympathetic system. Next is dopamine, which people associate with pleasure and reward. It's also vital for smooth movement. Too little dopamine causes the tremors of Parkinson's, while excess activity in certain brain circuits has been linked to schizophrenia. Serotonin is another big name. It shapes mood, sleep, and appetite. When serotonin is low, depression and anxiety can result. That's why many antidepressants work by increasing serotonin levels at the synapse. Adrenaline, or norepinephrine, plays a starring role in the sympathetic fight or flight response. It spikes heart rate, blood pressure, and alertness when we're under stress. You feel its effects when your adrenaline is pumping before an exam or before a big presentation. Glutamate is the brain's main excitatory signal. It strengthens synapses and underlies learning and memory. But too much glutamate is harmful. It can overstimulate neurons and cause cell death. GABA, on the other hand, is the main inhibitory neurotransmitter. It acts like the brain's brakes, calming neural activity. Many anti-anxiety medications enhance GABA to reduce overstimulation. And finally, your endorphins, the body's natural painkiller. They're released during exercise, stress, or injury. That runner's high people talk about comes from endorphins flooding the brain, reducing pain and promoting a sense of euphoria. The peripheral nervous system is like the highway network linking the brain and spinal cord with the rest of the body. Bundled axons form nerves wrapped in protective sheets. Cranial nerves connect directly to the brain and handle regions like the face, eyes, and internal organs, while spinal nerves connect the spinal cord and carry both sensory and motor information. This two-way traffic makes sure that the central nervous system always knows what happens and can respond. The somatic division is under voluntary control. You decide when to move your arm, and the command travels through your somatic motor neurons, but also includes reflexes which bypass conscious thought and speed. Reflexes like pulling your hand away from the hot stove protect you before you're even aware of the danger. Let's take the example of stepping on a sharp object. Pain receptors in your foot send action potentials to the spinal cord. Interneurons quickly relay the messages, and the motor neurons activate the muscles and pull your foot away. At the same time, signals cross the other side of the spinal cord to stiffen the opposing leg so you don't fall over. This happens all in a millisecond, long before the brain registers pain. Another important reflex is the stretch reflex, which helps maintain posture. A classic example is the knee jerk reflex. When a doctor taps the patellar tendon, it stretches the muscle, triggering a reflex contraction that makes your leg kick forward. This simple test tells physicians if the spinal cord and nerves are working properly. Now let's shift to the autonomic division. Unlike somatic control, this division manages the autonomic activities we don't consciously think about, like heart rate, digestion, and gland secretion. It uses two neurons to deliver signals from the central nervous system to target organs, a preganglionic neuron and a postganglionic neuron. The meeting point between these two neurons is a ganglion, essentially a hub of neuron cells bodies outside of the central nervous system. From there, the postganglionic neuron stretches out to the organ it controls. This two-step system allows more fine-tuned regulation compared to the somatic division. The autonomic system has two branches that work in opposition, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. Together they balance organ activity without our awareness. Smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands are all under this influence. One system revs things up, the other one slows them down, ensuring homeostasis. The sympathetic division prepares the body for emergencies. It triggers the fight or flight response by releasing norepinephrine. Heart rate increases, blood pressure rises, pupils dilate, and digestion slows down. The body focuses on resources for survival. What's striking is how coordinated the response is. Almost all organs shift at once. Balancing out the sympathetic division is the parasympathetic branch. Its key neurotransmitter is acetylcholine, and its job is to relax the body. It slows the heart rate, lowers respiration, and stimulates digestion and waste elimination. The constant push and pull between these two systems, the sympathetic, which is revving up, and the parasympathetic, which is calming us down. It also keeps the body's function in a steady balance. Let's zoom back out to the central nervous system. The brain and spinal cord are protected by several layers. Bone in the form of skull and vertebra, and the meninges, which are three membranes, and cerebrospinal fluid, which cushion and bathe the tissues. The blood-brain barrier adds another layer of defense, keeping many harmful chemicals and pathogens out of brain tissue. The spinal cord acts as the superhighway for nerve signals, carrying information up to the brain and commands back down to the body. Its outer white matter contains myelinated axons arranged into ascending sensory tracts and descending motor tracts. The inner gray matter houses neuron cell bodies and dendrites. Together they make the spinal cord both a relay station and a preceding hub for reflexes. The brain is our ultimate command center, divided into three main regions. The hindbrain manages autonomic life-sustaining functions. The midbrain handles reflexes related to vision and sound and regulates alertness. And the forebrain is the largest, handling emotions, memory, sensory processing, and conscious thought. The hindbrain is the most primitive part of the brain and includes the medulla oblongata, cerebellum, and pons. These structures handle movement and essential autonomic processes. Think of them as the body's autopilot system, keeping things running smoothly, whether you're aware of it or not. The medulla oblongata connects the brain directly to the spinal cord and controls vital processes like heart rate and breathing. It also contains the crossover point for motor nerves, meaning the right forebrain controls the left side of the body and vice versa. Without the medulla, survival would be impossible. Next is the cerebellum. This little brain coordinates movement and balance, and it stores muscle memory and repeated tasks like tying your shoes or swinging a bat. Alcohol strongly affects the cerebellum, which is why intoxication often shows up first as clumsiness or poor coordination. The pons links the higher brain centers with the spinal cord and also works with the medulla to regulate breathing. It acts like a bridge, coordinating information between regions. Together, the medulla, cerebellum, and pons form the foundation of autonomic and finely tuned body control. Moving upwards, the midbrain takes charge of reflexes responsible for sight and sound, like turning your head when you hear a loud noise. It also contains the centers that keep and control pupil size and eye movement. Importantly, clusters of neurons here regulate sleep and wakefulness. Some keep a steady stream of impulses flowing to the cerebrum to keep us alert, while others form a sleep center that promotes rest. Finally, the forebrain. This region is the most advanced, handling emotions, homeostasis, memory, and higher order thinking. The hypothalamus regulates balance in the body, and the thalamus directs sensory traffic. The limbic system shapes our emotions, and the cerebrum is the seat of conscious thought, language, decision making. The forebrain is what makes us distinctly human. The hypothalamus sits at the base of the forebrain and acts as the body's control center for homeostasis. It monitors things like temperature, thirst, hunger, and even coordinates with the pituitary gland to regulate hormones. Right next door is the thalamus, which works like the relay station, receiving sensory information and sending it to the cerebrum for interpretation. These two structures make sure our body stays balanced and our brain gets the information it needs. The limbic system ties our emotions to our memories. It governs behaviors like fear, anger, and pleasure, but also basic drives like hunger and thirst. The hippocampus, which is part of the limbic system, is essentially important for forming and retrieving memories. Sadly, this is the first area affected in Alzheimer's disease, which explains why memory loss is an elderly symptom. The cerebrum is the largest and most advanced part of the brain. It's divided into the right and left hemispheres connected by the corpus callosum. The outer layers, the cerebral cortex, is highly folded with and filled with gray matter. This is where higher level functions live: conscious thought, voluntary movement, problem solving, and language. The cerebral cortex handles memory, awareness, abstract thought, and conscious control of movement. It's divided into different lobes, each with its specialties. The occipital lobe processes vision, the temporal lobe handles hearing and language, the parietal lobes interpret sensory information from the skin, and the frontal lobe manages speech, thought, and motor activity. Within these lobes, very specific regions are mapped out for body functions. The primary somatosensory area in the parietal lobes receives input from the skin, while the primary motor areas in the frontal lobes send commands to the muscles. This mapping is so precise that certain regions of the brain correspond directly to specific body parts. Memory isn't one size fits all. Short-term memory or working memory holds information for just hours and relies on the limbic system. Long-term memory can last for years and involves both the hippocampus and the cerebral cortex. Creating long-term memories actually changes these structures of the neurons, strengthening synapses and building new connections. Psychoactive drugs can actually hijack this system. They cross the blood-brain barrier and interfere with neurotransmitter actions, changing patterns of electrical activity in the brain. Depending on the drug, this can actually alter consciousness, mood, or behavior. Cocaine, for example, blocks the reuptake of dopamine, flooding the synapse and prolonged feeling of pleasure. Opioids like morphine and fentanyl mimic endorphins, binding to pain-blocking receptors and producing a euphoria. These short-term effects make the drug powerful, but they also set the stage for dependence and addiction. Dependence develops when a user craves the drug's effect. Tolerance follows, meaning more of the drug is needed to achieve the same high. Addiction takes over when obtaining and using the substance becomes compulsive, no longer a matter of choice. Withdrawal, with its painful physical symptoms, locks users into a cycle that's difficult to break. Not all brain changes come from chemicals. Trauma like concussions can disrupt electrical activities in the brain. Symptoms range from headaches and memory problems to balance issues. In some cases, bleeding between the meninges creates pressure in the brain, which can be life-threatening if not relieved. This is why athletes are carefully monitored after a head injury. Injuries to the spinal cord can be devastating because they can interrupt communication highways between the brain and the body. Injuries lower on the cord may cause paraplegia, affecting the legs and the trunk. Injuries higher up, especially in the neck, can cause quadriplegia, impacting all four limbs. The higher the injury, the greater the risk to survival, since breathing muscles can be affected. Encephalitis is inflammation of the brain tissue, usually caused by viruses like herpes simplex or West Nile virus. Symptoms can range from mild fatigue to severe confusion, seizures, and memory issues. Because it crosses the blood-brain barrier, treatment is difficult, though antiviral drugs can sometimes help. Meningitis affects the protective membranes around the brain and spinal cord. Symptoms include headache, fever, nausea, and sensitivity to light. Viral meningitis is usually milder, while bacterial meningitis can be life-threatening, if not treated quickly with antibiotics. It's one of the reasons vaccines against certain bacteria are also highly important for public health. Rabies is one of the most feared viral infections because of how it attacks the nervous system. It usually is transmitted through bites from infected animals like bats, raccoons, or dogs, while virus travels along the sensory neurons to the central nervous system, causing symptoms like painful swallowing, hallucinations, and spasms. Once symptoms appear, rabies is almost always fatal. Prevention through vaccinations, both for the pet and for the people after exposure, is critical. Brain tumors may be benign or cancerous, but both can cause problems by pressing on brain tissue. Symptoms vary widely depending on the tumor's location, from seizures to changes in personality or movement. Treatment can include surgery, radiation, or chemotherapy. The complexity of the brain makes treatment challenging, since removing or damaging surrounding tissues can actually have a long-lasting effect. Epilepsy is a condition where abnormal electrical activity in the brain leads to seizures. These seizures can be mild or severe, sometimes involving muscle spasms, loss of awareness, or unusual sensation. Triggers might include fatigue, stress, or flashing lights. Because it is often developed in childhood or adolescence, epilepsy requires long-term management with medications and lifestyle adjustments. Alzheimer's is the leading cause of dementia. It begins with small memory lapses, but gradually progresses to severe memory loss and personality changes. The disease is linked to abnormal protein buildup, tau and beta amyloids that disrupt communications between the neurons. It often starts in the hippocampus, which explains why early memory loss and issues, and then spreads to the cortex. Research continues into early diagnosis and treatment, but prevention remains very difficult. Parkinson's disease is a progressive condition where dopamine-producing neurons in the midbrain deteriorates. Without enough dopamine, muscle movement becomes stiff and shaky, leading to tremors, slurred speech, and difficulty with mobility. Medications like L-Dopa can temporarily improve symptoms, but they don't stop the neuron loss. Current research is exploring stem cell therapies to replace lost neurons.